Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Time Traveler's Wife finale. I don't know whether that's season finale, series finale. It still feels like that's up in the air potentially, but regardless, this was a great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, I love that. I think that's such an interesting element where obviously episode 2 was mainly about his mom, and this episode was about him and his future and obviously his concerns, but also bringing his dad back into the fold. And obviously his dad catching him with himself, and he's like, right. And I love that he's trying to be like, Dad, I'm not gay, if that's what you're worried about. He's like, Henry, I'm not worried about you're gay. I'm a musician. Everybody's gay. So it's kind of like, well, who cares? Like, you know, I'm not getting caught up in such, which I think it had to be nice for him to be like, oh, that's cool. Nice to know my dad's not closed-minded. But it's just kind of the thing of, you were with yourself. He's like, okay, I'm a time traveler, which his dad is like, no, you're lying. Why can't you tell the truth? Because he's like, all those times I disappeared from school, I was at Skippy's school, I was time traveling. And he's like, that time you and Mom first kissed, I was there. I saw my parents first kiss. I saw you dance. You thought no one saw you, but I saw you, and I danced. And we never really got to the ins and outs of what it was, but Henry was, like, him and his dad relationship, I don't think was ever the same. I don't think it was ever the same after his mom died. Because obviously you see him being nostalgic and watching videos, and I think that's a beautiful thing in itself, like that element of nostalgia. What nostalgia means for a time traveler who's going to the future and kind of know what's awaiting him, it is kind of, even the future, it's nostalgic in its own right, which is kind of crazy. I kept wondering why Henry did seem like, even though he's 42, because that's the oldest we see him, like, why he seems so much older. It's because it seems like his body, I guess that would be the explanation, because I was like, he does look older than 42, because 42 doesn't look like that. Because Theo James can't be that far from 42 himself. So he's basically 37. Not basically, is 37. So he's not that far. So that's why I was kind of like, yeah, he didn't seem like a typical 42-year-old. So that's why I thought was kind of interesting. But it's like, right, because I guess because of the time travel affecting his body. I mean, I guess if your body's going through time travel like that, I guess it is kind of accelerating your body on probably like a molecular and cellular level, you know. Probably, I don't know if the show will ever like really get into the minutia of that, depending on if it continues or not. But regardless, I just thought that was a, like, because you have the 42-year-old time traveling back to see a 14-year-old Claire at the clearing, and he's like, hey, he got nostalgic because he's like, this is he references a shoe polish day, because he's like, oh, that song playing, it was a song his mom, Claire's mom was playing, and it was nostalgic to him, because we find out later on, because of the wedding and everything, so it made him nostalgic. Because he talks about not liking things being videoed, because I think it's a representation of things being in the past and us holding on to the past. As he says, like, the past is gone. It doesn't matter. The future isn't even here yet. All we have is right now. That's kind of like the focal point, right? And so, you know, as someone who's going to the future, like, of course, video is going to rub you the wrong way, because it's just going to be a reminder of the past. You as a time traveler who constantly travels to and from the past. So it just, you know, there's layers to how that's going to make you feel. You're going to feel all types of complicated about it. But it is Claire and Henry's wedding day. It's getting closer and closer. And he ends up time traveling to the future, just as probably like his 42-year-old self time traveled back to that 14-year-old Claire. And he's there, and he's seeing the tree. And he constantly, throughout the episode, time travels to what is essentially their house. Obviously, he's talked about it. Him being stressed about something typically gets him time traveling to a certain spot. Because when he thinks about it, when stuff makes him think about his mom, he stresses out, and then he time travels to the moment his mom dies. That's typically how that works. It doesn't matter what you want. If it, you know, it's so interesting to know that his time travel is kind of connected to his mind. It's like if he's thinking about something hard enough, then it's automatically going to time travel him to something related to that. But ultimately, Claire wants to meet his dad, which he's still kind of reluctant about it. And he says that him and his dad don't have like the best relationship, because the nature of, it's like they don't really have, they have things in common, but it's also that it doesn't lead to a healthy thing. It's just kind of like the way of processing and dealing with everything and just drinking, and it just seems like that kind of creates some issues. So they meet his dad, and I love that. Like, the thing is, even Claire admits that he's like, oh, do you like him, don't you? She's like, yes and no. He reminds me a lot of you, which I don't know if Henry I don't know if he really knows how to like take that, how to feel about that. It's like, right, because there's good and bad about, you know, being like that. His dad reminds Claire of him, you know, so that layers a complicated feeling. So, but constantly throughout, like I said, the episode, he's time traveling to that house. He went there when he was 30 and Claire was 22, and he's hiding, and it's like, oh, this is the house. And she's like, how? We haven't picked out. He's like, trust me, I've seen this house multiple times, trees. This is going to be the house. She's like, well, don't I get a decision? She's like, no, of course, but you're going to end up deciding this one. She's like, but what if I want to be spontaneous? You picking this house no, it is your choice. You are going to be spontaneous, but you're going to pick this place. It's like, are there no surprises? It's like, yeah, I guess life is both a surprise and not a surprise when you're dating a time traveler. And then he brings up the lottery number thing, and she's like, wait, who are you talking to? He's like, oh, no one. I just talking to a ghost, because it's like, right, you remembered you popped up here 2 years ago to give yourself the lottery numbers for tonight. So it's like, yeah, it's interesting how that, right? So 28-year-old Henry went back, wrote those down, and I love that we're just like constantly jumping around. Like, it's like, oh, the wedding's a couple weeks away, and it gets less time and less time and less time. And Henry's stressed and he's worried because it's like, right, what if I end up time traveling? He's more so worried about missing his wedding, but I guess it's also like, right, I don't want other people to see. You know, it's like, yes, it's a select group of people that know. If you're in the know, you're in the know. But there's this whole situation. I love that he's talking to his dad, because Claire had also brought it up. Like, why don't you go see a doctor about this? And he was like, right, just for them to experiment on me, and I have to basically, because it's like, yeah, them checking me out. He's like, it basically sounds like dissecting. And she's like, I won't let them do that. He's like, because we're about to get married, so that means basically she's going to raise hell if her husband doesn't come home. So it's like, I'm going to make sure they give you back, you know? And for Henry, that's what scares him the most. It's like, he's happy, he's hopeful, and hope is like, for him, it is the biggest poison for a time traveler, just because it's like, right, you want to enjoy that hope, you want to be filled with that hope, but the problem is that the future's always come a knocking, because you're always going to be time traveling, because you know at some point in time you won't make it. And yes, that day isn't today, and it might not be tomorrow, but it's at some point tomorrow, whether that's 50,000 tomorrows from now or not. You know it's coming, and that's always like kind of living that hope with that despair lingering, you know, in the distance. As always, you know, you're always walking around life with a guillotine just ready to come down. You don't know when it's coming down, but you know it's there hanging above your head. So and his dad even talked to him about going to see a doctor, but he's like, no, I don't want to do that, you know, because they might take me away. But his dad's like, secret governments like experimenting on people, that doesn't happen. That's only in the movies. And he's like, yeah, time travel's supposed to only be in the movies too. So he's trying to find a remedy to this whole thing. So he ends up meeting up with his old buddy Ben, he's like, yeah, I need something to hold me down, you know, for 9 hours so I don't time travel. He's like, wow, you're still doing that? He's like, yep, still doing that. Because he also says like, right, you kind of ignored me for a while now. And it's like, oh, that's sad. But it's like, right, Ben hooks him up with a pill. And I love Ben being like, all right. At first I was kind of scared that Ben had nefarious motives, being like, you just took a pill. I just put out a pill in front of you. You're kind of an idiot for just taking it. Even though I just put a pill in front of you, you just took it without really much concern. Because his worry is like, right, I need to be grounded. I need to be here, present for 9 hours, because if I'm not here for 9 hours, then he's worried that because he needs something to mellow him out. Because his dad's way of dealing with things is to drink, but it's like, I don't want to be fucking drunk my entire wedding. So he needed medication to like ground himself. And I love Gomez being the buddy is, like, yo, I talk to my clients who are in the area. I know who you are and what you do. They go in. Sadly, Henry's already time traveled. And it's like, oh boy. Because Henry, I kept wondering how this was all going to play out, because 30-year-old Henry, when he was talking to 22-year-old Claire, was saying like, oh, how interesting it is that it was interesting that they were referencing like oh, you're technically my wife. And you're like, wait. So I guess because I was like, I guess because you guys were married in the future and you missed your date, your chance to get married in the present day. So that's also the complicated thing of, because what is present? It's relative to a time traveler, and relative in the case of this show, because I'd say like present would be 2008, where we're with present day, well, 28-year-old Claire and 28-year-old Henry and 20-year-old Claire, because that's technically present, even though present would be 2022, where the future is with an older Claire and an older Henry. Well, because from what we've seen with the older Claire, that means that's much, much further in the future. Also begs the question, who are they taking those videos for? Is that just for each other? Is that for like a past Henry to eventually stumble across those videos? Or is it just because, because Claire, present day, wants she wants to videotape everything so we can look back, and he's like, do I have to, and Henry's like, do I have to be in the video? She's like, yeah, you do. So maybe that's him eventually compromising with her and doing that. But part of me also wondered, could it be that some doctors or whatever are examining him, so they are getting him, because at the beginning it did seem like he was talking to himself, because he's saying like, oh, you'll be nostalgic. So it sounded like either he was talking to a future Claire that would be watching those, and maybe future older Claire is making those videos for a younger Henry to potentially watch. I don't know. Like, they're making these videos potentially for each other. I feel like there's so many different ways that could be interpreted and that could represent, but he definitely knows something's not right, because when he time travels at different points, for one, Claire is touching the box and she's crying, and later on it's like, he goes back to present day, he's like, yeah, what is this box? And she's like, yeah, this is where my jewelry's going to be kept, this is something her mom gave her. Then he finds her older, watching the wedding video and crying. Then at a different point in time, he finds like 36-year-old and 29-year-old Claire, 36-year-old him and 29-year-old Claire arguing back and forth. And then she's like pissed at him about something, and you're unclear what it is. And I thought that sequence was so scary and just kind of made you kind of feel like claustrophobic. It made me feel that way, where he's just constantly time traveling all over the place. He's coming back to present day and more time is passing. And it's like, you got to get ready. It's like you got 7 hours to the wedding. He's like, wait, what? They're like, yeah, you've been gone an entire day, because he had disappeared before and he had been gone all night. But he was like, yeah, it felt like 2 minutes to me. Once again, it's that Doctor Who thing of like, no, don't worry, I'll get you back in him. You only be gone 5 minutes. Oh, cool. I said I'll get you back, and it'll be like you left in 5 minutes. It's actually been an entire month since you've been gone. So it's that complicated thing, and this time, he just, once again, that flashing back and forth, and then he sees that little girl, which I'm like, wait, you do have a daughter? But it's like, I thought I figured you weren't going to have kids because my thought was he wasn't going to have kids because eventually they'd get the time travel sickness, which does seem like it is the case as well. I think that's so interesting that Henry strikes when he's 8 years old. To be fair, a traumatic event, I guess, triggered it. But why didn't it? Maybe it's something because Henry didn't contract the time sickness until he was 8. But we find out later on that they've attempted to have babies multiple times, but the baby's time traveled out of the womb and died multiple times, every time. So she's had, like, by this point, she's had 5 miscarriages. You're like, Jesus, that's rough. And it turns out 36-year-old Henry, he got a vasectomy, and he didn't tell her, and that's why she's so pissed at him. And for 28-year-old Henry, it's like, no, I'm not going to do that to Claire. I refuse. He's like, yeah, you say that, but he's like, I remember being where you were, having this exact conversation a couple years ago. The fact of the matter is, you're going to do it. Like, oh, you think you're going to be the one to change things? 28-year-old Henry punches 36-year-old, and they're basically stuck in opposite times they're supposed to be. He's stuck in the future. 36-year-old him is stuck in the past. And it's like, cool, this is an older Henry. He's like, well, this sucks. So now we know where the shoe polish comes in to dye his hair up to make it seem like he is that he is the Henry that he's supposed to be, when in actuality he's not. I have a love of Gomez being like, all right, make sure no one gets a close enough look so they don't see how old and shitty you look. And he's like, thanks, Gomez. Thanks for, and I'm supposed to be not worrying. He's like, well, don't worry because we don't want you crinkling. I guess that's their terminology of like, well, at first I was like, I thought that was like him referencing like, oh, we don't want you time traveling. It's like, no, crinkling is in like, we don't want any, I guess like, well, I guess it could be both, because I thought maybe he's like, we don't want you wrinkling and revealing how old you actually are. But I think maybe crinkling is supposed to be his terminology for time traveling, because just like, God, I'm blanking on what it's called now, but in 12 Monkeys, they have a very specific name. Splintering is what they call it in 12 Monkeys, so not everything calls time travel the same thing. So I didn't know if that was supposed to be like a term, Gomez's own time travel terminology, or whether it was supposed to be a term for him just being like, no, just don't get any wrinkles, don't crinkle. I feel like it could be both. That's a complicated, rough end of things. And I love that moment between him and his dad where he's like, that look in your eyes. He's like, when talking to 36-year-old Henry, he's like, you're looking at me like you haven't seen me in a while. And Henry doesn't say anything, but it's like, so that must mean Henry only has like a couple more years with his dad. But even his dad being, because when he was talking to 28-year-old Henry, it's like, they hadn't talked in a while. It was this and that, but I think this whole thing brought them back closer together. And I think now probably older Henry probably appreciates the little, appreciates the time he had with his dad that he kind of took for granted, which, it kind of makes you go like, damn, makes me go like, damn, I need to call my dad. I haven't talked to my dad in a couple of weeks. Well, actually, I saw him face to face like maybe a week or two ago, but I haven't called him in a while. So it's just like, it makes you go like, I should call my dad. It kind of gets you feeling like that. Once again, just not taking things for granted. It's something I always say, but I always struggle with. Regardless, getting back into it, his dad saying, because he had asked him, it's like, was it all worth it? And he was like, getting married and stuff like that was at the but it was also about, because I thought he was going to be like, oh, having me, but it's like, no, he was much more specific about you marrying, not just getting married, but getting married to mom and losing her. Was it all worth it? Because he's like, right, me and Claire, he's like, it's complicated. Like, he's like, I'm aging faster. Eventually Claire's going to lose me, and I know it, and she knows it. And getting married to her, is it worth it when I know I'm going to be leaving such a huge gap in her life that I'm going to be hurting her, even though it's not my intention? So that's the thing of like, is it wrong to get in a relationship knowing that you're going to basically, knowing, not just guessing, knowing for a fact you're going to hurt someone because you know something's going to happen to you one day, you just don't know when. And in that moment, his dad said, yes, it was worth it. Having him made it worth it. So, having children makes it worth it, because that way it's like, we still have something together that binds us, that even though your mom's gone, I still have you as a reminder of that. Because even Henry had said that earlier with Claire about him and his dad, that when he looks at his dad, he's wondering where his mom is. And every time his dad looks at him, it's just a reminder that his wife is gone. But in the end, it is this double-edged sword of complex feelings of like, right, it is the love of knowing like, right, the person you love is still around, they're carried over in your children. But for Henry, it's like, yeah, but that situation is complicated. He's like, yeah, but problems can be solved. And he's like, this one can't. I think it will eventually get solved, because 28-year-old Henry saw, but it could be that 36-year-old Henry even admits his memory's a little unclear, and he saw something, but he wasn't sure because he immediately popped out of there. But you can assume he can't, because it was an older Gomez, and it was an older Claire as well. So you're assuming that's supposed to be like his wake or his funeral or something. Once again, we don't know we know that whenever he dies, like every part of his body time travels. So no matter when and where he died, he would have eventually probably popped back. Like, because this is probably like 42-year-old Henry who eventually returned. Huh? And part of me wonders if that 42-year-old Henry that's right there, with 14-year-old Claire, eventually time traveled to a younger Claire who heard Henry calling out to her. I think that's the Henry before he ended up dying, because there was a gunshot, and that's probably why that's probably rough, like where he is right now is probably roughly around the time or some time frame where he ends up dying, because I think he ends up getting shot by her dad and her brother who out hunting. But he was like, no, there was no one out here. It's like, well, they didn't see anyone, and she saw some blood, but it disappeared because it was Henry's blood and it time traveled. So did he. So he probably popped back into present day, whatever time he was from that was present to him. And that's probably how they... But begs the question, does his dead body time travel? We know his blood can time travel, his nails and stuff like that, they can all time travel. So the question is, can his body time travel? Like its dead body, or like once he's no longer alive? Because the blood that time travels is probably him is while his heart's still beating. So that makes the blood... No, but then it's also like, right, his nails and stuff time travel too. So we haven't really covered that, whether or not his dead body time travels, which is creepy. But maybe it stops, but maybe... Because technically, I guess, it's like, because your nails can grow and stuff, so maybe that's why they can still time travel even when you clip your nails and shit, because it's technically a part of your living... You know, maybe that's the justification for it. And, but I love getting into the complexities of the wedding day, and 28-year-old Henry finding out, wait, what? Because Claire's there watching the video, and because she's like, oh, it's shoe polish day, she knows what day it is. And so there he is looking in the camera, 36-year-old being like, because she's like, yeah, he remembers this day. It's like, what? And he's in the 36-year-old Henry's looking in the camera, calling, saying asshole, and flicking him off. And Claire's like, oh, that cameraman's got to feel all kind of weird ways, because later Henry looks in the camera and he says, I love you. And the cameraman's just like, what? You know? And now it's like 28-year-old Henry is like, oh, that's kind of jacked up. That asshole was there marrying my girlfriend. I love the complexity of it, because it's like, that's not me. Yeah, it's future me, but it's not me. He's marrying my girlfriend while I'm sitting here with his wife. That's all kind of jacked up. Which I love. Once again, you have to find the sense of humor in it, where Claire's like, oh, you're 28 now. And she's like, oh, I'm finally the older woman. Their entire relationship, he's always been the older man now. It's like, oh, now I'm the older woman. Ooh. She's out there like she's a cougar or something. She's only like a year older than him, but I love that. But her biggest issue is, she says that she may get pissed at him sometimes, but she doesn't hate Henry. She can never hate Henry. She wants to punch him in his stupid face sometimes. Because for her, the problem is Henry gave up. It's like they tried for 5 times, and each time she's like, maybe Henry thought, you were doing what you thought was right for me because you thought that, you thought it was too much for me to handle, but I never would have given up. You gave up after 5 attempts, because each one, it's like Claire kept holding out hope that this was going to be the one. My thought, and it didn't end up happening, but part of me thought, was it going to be that 28-year-old Henry and 29-year-old Claire were going to bang it out, and she was going to get pregnant that way, which I'm sure 36-year-old Henry wouldn't have appreciated that, but... And Henry, because for Henry, it's like, we're married, so I'm supposed to make you happy, and she's almost like, who told you such a, like, very, like, naive notion? Because she's like, we're married. We're not, like, going on vacation or just, like, it's like, no. If we're happy, that's a bonus. But marriage, she's like, getting married was, like, the moment of knowing that this is the happiest moment of my life, because she knows there's going to be struggles ahead. But the thing is to make my happy days happier, and sad days just be there to be that shoulder I can lean on, and make my sad days bearable. That's kind of the whole thing of marriage. It is about not necessarily compromising, but doing your best to make things good. It's not about like, oh, I have to make every day. Like, you just have to, it's kind of like be there for each other, and keep my happy days happy, keep my sad days bearable, because this is the happiest moment of like what my life is going to be like. She's like, I knew it then. Looking back, I definitely knew it then as well. And she's like, yeah, pop in from time to time. But Henry's like, yeah, but I'm not sure. And she's like, Henry, we're married. Because she's almost like, yo, pop in from time to time and like, let's bang it out if we want to. And because even she's like, right, I miss you. He's like, yeah, but we're married. She's like, no, but this you, the young, angry. She's like, did I change you? Did I make you decide to change? Because the Henry that he is when he's younger and brash and angry isn't the same Henry she's currently married to. And she almost wonders, like, did I, makes her a little nostalgic for this Henry. And it's like, did I make you like that? Which is so interesting, because 29-year-old misses the 20 who Henry was at when she first met him. 20-year-old Claire is with 36-year-old Henry, the Henry she fell in love with, and it's like and they're both saying like, "Oh, I miss this version of you." So that's layers of confusing and complicated, but it also shows like, right, this is what Claire wanted when she was 20. This is what Claire wanted when she was 20. What she wants when she's 29. So it's funny how that all works out. And I do love that she eventually figured out like, okay, where is Henry? And it's like, don't worry, Junior's gonna come back after this. But it's actually a beautiful ceremony, beautiful all around. Makes you wonder. Well, we know her sister knows, but it makes you wonder will the rest of the family ever find out? The rest, like her mom, her dad, and her brother, ever find out about Henry's circumstances? Probably the extended family probably won't, but still. I also love really quickly the Ben thing, because Ben was like, "Yo, am I still around?" It's like, "Yeah, we just hung out last Tuesday." He was like, "Thanks, man." He's glad to know him and Henry are still friends. I love that whole thing. But yeah, I think him and Claire will eventually have children because of what he saw. So it kind of, but I love that moment at the end too. Well, go ahead and finish my thought. I think he has a time-traveling daughter. The question is, does he eventually go to a doctor who helps him understand things a little bit better? Once again, is that what the tapes are about? Or is it a situation of like, you know, because like I said, does a younger Henry bang it out with like an older Claire and they have a child? Because anytime because we have yet to see like far into the future, so I think they do have a daughter together. Just maybe going back in time and talking to his dad, maybe 36-year-old Henry he has a vasectomy, like that can't be reversed, so it probably has to be a younger Henry that ends up sleeping with an older Claire and they end up having a baby. Because that's, once again, the complicated thing of like, even knowing what the future is, even if you want to change things, you're still going to go down that route. Because, yes, Henry knows what 36-year-old version of himself did, having a vasectomy and never telling Claire. But knowing from her, you know, that she was also saying, like, right, even when I do something to hurt you, you forgive me, and I will try to do the same thing when it comes to you. So even knowing that, when you're going through the pain of having a miscarriage over and over again, and knowing, like, right, you're partly to blame for that because of the time travel aspect of yourself, that even knowing what the future holds, it's still going to break you down, and you go like, no, I got to have the vasectomy. I can't let Claire go through this pain. Even having that conversation about, but knowing like eventually when he does come back, she will forgive him because she doesn't hate him. She never will, even if she wants to punch him in the face, you know? So I think that was a beautiful element to the episode all around. There's still so much story to tell because I feel like the story won't end until Henry dies, but he did run into like the older version, like the 42-year-old's version of himself while he was like doing all those massive jumps all at once all over the place. Because at the time of me recording this, it's still unclear. Like, obviously fans and people are hoping for a season 2. I think even Theo James and Rose Leslie, and I think other people from the show want there to be a season 2. There definitely needs to be one, but other places are kind of labeling this as the finale. So once again, I don't know whether this is like how the book ends. I mean, there's plenty of things that like use a book for a foundation and then eventually go off and do their own thing, which obviously for some people, especially with HBO, it's like, sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's bad. I don't care. I want more of this show because there's still so much history to tell, because there's still 14 years. Because once again, we stayed with 28-year-old Henry. I mean, obviously we bounced back and forth with like other versions of himself, but there's still like 14 years of time you can fiddle with and jump around with and kind of live in some of that time of stuff. But also at the same time, it's like, technically speaking, I guess to some arguable sense, you could say like you've gotten the full scope of his story. You might not know what the ending is, but the ending kind of isn't important. You know, it's always like, oh, the journey along the way is what matters the most. So maybe you can make that one. But I'm still like, I feel like the story will never not be officially over until we as the audience see Henry die, which is so jacked up. But I feel like even because it's there, once again, the ever looming thing, and we've seen the aftermath of it. We've seen an older Claire watching the video. I mean, and I love that time frame of just like everyone at the wedding, 29-year-old Claire and 28-year-old Henry singing, a much older Claire being nostalgic, watching videos, singing along as well. I even love 29-year-old Claire being like, shut up and watch the video and admire my dress, because since you couldn't be there. That is funny because it's interesting. That's got to be such an interesting thing. Like, I wonder, did he know for sure that he was going to time travel to, like, he knew it because he remembers being the 28-year-old Henry that was going to punch him. Even though he says my memory's a little fuzzy, he's probably lying. Either way, I'm hoping for a season 2 because I'd love a season 2 to this because I'd love to see where it would end up taking us, because I think that'd be really, really interesting. Because I feel like that, once again, there's still so much story to tell because everything was so quick shotted, but like I feel like a lot of that time we could spend time, there, at those different points. And so I think, once again, at the time we're recording this, HBO hasn't necessarily renewed it, but hasn't really canceled it either. So we'll see whether or not the show gets another season. I am hopeful because even if it's just like the show gets one more season, that's still, I'd still be grateful for that. I don't think this would run forever. I think this would be like a 2, maybe 3 season show at most. But I'd love to see where a season 2 would take us. What stories, what shenanigans we'd get into. Because there's still like some people's stories we haven't gotten where they'll end up and everything. But still, I'm very hopeful for season 2, which is funny, and considering the whole conversation of hope and everything. When it comes to Henry's circumstances and, everything between him and Claire. But, yeah. That's really all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.